And of course, it's right after the baby goes down that I decide to have any free time or quiet to potentially do Connie reads, Brian's Hunt. I apologize for the microwave. That'll go off here momentarily, but it'll be fine. We are on chapter 3. Let's see. He had changed. He thought at first that he had changed again, that there were steps in how he had done so, but he realized that he was changing constantly as the world around him shifted, as he learned more. His approach to camping was a good example. When he had first been in the bush just after the crash, he had needed shelter and a settled place to be. Or he thought he did. He had since decided he'd been wrong to stay with the plane. With his knowledge now, he would make weapons and start to move south, hunting as he moved. Hunt traveling. But back then, he had needed a camp and had thought they would find him soon. They hadn't, because he'd been so far off course. And then, too, he had not had an easy time making fire. To move constantly and try to make a new fire each night with the hatchet and a rock, or at least each time he wanted to cook meat, would have been very slow, next to impossible. But he had changed. Now he did not spend an inordinate amount of time on campsites. So he found a clearing in a short time, beached the canoe, made a fire with one waxed match, gutted the fish, and threw the guts in the lake, where they immediately attracted small panfish that cleaned them up in moments, and set the northern on a flat piece of wood to cook one side. It was done in 10 minutes, and he stripped the meat off the side, still steaming, into an aluminum pot from his cook set, and turned the fish over to cook the other side while he ate the first. He had salt, but was favoring it less and less. He ate the meat with his fingers, picking carefully through the bones, including the notorious Y bones, until nothing was left but bones, and by that time the second half was done. He ate the meat from that, then broke the head open and ate the brain and eyes. He had long ago stopped being picky or squeamish. Put the bones and carcass back in the lake where the panfish would get at it, and set to his gear. He was meticulous about his gear, and he tried to check everything once a day, starting with the canoe, which was Kevlar and almost bulletproof. Next, the 2 composite paddles. Then his weapons. He had the bow, a laminate straight, almost a long bow, that pulled 45 pounds at 26 inches draw. He had tried stronger bows, tested them for a time, and looked at compounds, but they had pulleys and cables and tuning requirements too tricky to be much good for hard use in the bush. He checked the bow and string, and his 2 spare strings, and then each arrow, using his small stone to touch up the sharpness of the broadheads, which he kept like razors. They could shave the hair off his arms. Making sure the arrow he had used on the northern was set to dry right, and the feathers would stay straight. Then his knife. He had a straight-edge hunting knife always on his belt, almost a copy of Second World War Marine Corps issue knives called K-bars, and he used the same small stone he used on his broadheads to touch up the blade. Then a small double-edged cruiser axe that he used as a general tool for cutting wood or setting up a lean-to with the canoe. And then each piece of clothing, checking the stitches and using a sewing repair kit to fix any problems. Next, his moccasins, of which he had 3 pair, including a knee-high pair that he would fashion into mullocks for cold weather. He had a light jacket and a pullover anorak that came down to his knees, made of breathable, waterproof cloth, and 2 polar fleece pullovers to wear under the parka, and 2 pair of polar fleece pants, and 4 pair of brown jersey gloves, which he found to be as good as anything. He could not stand a hard winter, but he was good for anything less, way better than he'd been for his first winter. And when all the gear was checked, he boiled some water from the lake and made a pot of tea, and when it had cooled, he drank the whole pot and leaned back against a log nearby and sat watching the fire, his stomach full. evening on its way, and a drowsy mood coming over him. He had a sleeping bag in the canoe, a good 5-pounder that would keep him warm to 10 above, and a closed-cell foam pad for a mattress. He thought of getting them out and setting up a land cap to spend the night, but decided against it. The bag was really too much for weather this warm. If there wasn't strong wind and it didn't rain, he had taken to sleeping in the canoe out on the lake. He had a small grapnel hook with dulled, rounded points, only 4 inches across, and 100 feet of light nylon line, and he would drop the hook and let it bite into the weeds and mud on the bottom and feed out enough line to hold the hook down and in place, and then tie it off to the bow of the canoe, and unfurl his pad in the bow in front of the cargo, and sleep there with the cargo and its covering tarp for a pillow. Most of the lakes in the North Country were shallow, scooped out by ancient glaciers, rarely over 15 or 20 feet deep. And if the wind didn't come up, it was like sleeping in a cradle. Usually out on the water away, the mosquitoes were not much of a bother. It was late summer now, and they were not as bad as they are in the first part of the year, when driven by the need to hunt and get blood and lay eggs before fall. In the first hatch in the summer, Brian had seen swarms so bad they plugged his nostrils. Lord, how he hated them when he'd first crawled ashore from the plane crash. They had torn him apart. Dark was coming now, and he made sure the fire was out, loaded his gear back in the canoe, and paddled out offshore 100 yards. Here, he stopped the canoe and drifted for a few minutes, checking the weather. But the sunset was beautifully calm, serene, not a breath of wind, and he nodded and slid the hook over the side until it hit the bottom, then backpedaled until it bit, tied it off to his bow line, and arranged his bed to sleep on top of his bag because the air was still warm and mellow. He lay down to rest, listening to the evening cry of loons calling to each other across the mirrored water. A perfect day among many perfect days, and the last thought he had before slipping into sleep was that he was in exactly the right spot at exactly the right time in his life. Perfect. And that's the end of chapter 3. Be careful with that and enjoy, please and thank you, and I will see you for the next installment. Bye.